I was watering the plants on my porch when the unmarked Crown Victoria pulled up to my driveway. Two men in what looked like police uniforms stepped out, their hands resting casually on what appeared to be service weapons. My heart rate quickened. I hadn't done anything wrong, but experience in Afghanistan had taught me that authority figures showing up unexpectedly rarely meant good news. "Mr. Zachary Owens?" the taller one called out, his voice carrying across my front yard. "That's me," I replied, setting down my watering can and wiping my hands on my jeans. "We need to talk to you about multiple code violations on your property," the shorter one said, taking a step forward onto my lawn. "We have the authority to issue citations today if these aren't addressed immediately." Something felt off. Their uniforms looked almost right, but not quite. The badges seemed generic, lacking the specific insignia of our local department. And our local cops drove marked vehicles with the town logo, not unmarked Crown Vics with tinted windows. I'd spent 12 years in Delta Force before taking a medical retirement after catching some shrapnel in my left leg. The training never really leaves you, especially the part about assessing threats and identifying imposters. These guys weren't cops. But who sent them, and why? That's when I spotted Carol Norwood watching from across the street, arms crossed, a satisfied smile on her face. Our HOA president, or as I like to think of her, the neighborhood tyrant. Everything suddenly clicked into place. What I didn't know then was that this confrontation would expose a years-long extortion scheme that had terrorized our entire community, and that the next 60 seconds would change everything. "Can I see some identification, officers?" I asked calmly, stepping down from my porch. The two men exchanged glances. "Sir, we need you to address these violations immediately," the taller one repeated, avoiding my question. "What violations exactly?" I kept my tone respectful but firm. "Your fence height exceeds regulation by 3 inches, your trash cans were visible from the street on Tuesday, and you've installed unauthorized solar panels without approval," the shorter one said, pulling out what looked like citation papers. I had to suppress a laugh. The fence had been approved by the Architectural Committee last year. My trash cans were always tucked away behind the garage. And I didn't have solar panels, my neighbor did. "I'm going to ask one more time to see your badges and identification," I said, pulling my phone from my pocket. The taller man's hand moved more deliberately toward his hip. "Sir, put the phone down now." That's when my old friend Jake, who lived next door, stepped out onto his porch. Jake had served with me in the same Delta unit for 8 years. He'd seen the exchange and immediately recognized what was happening. "Everything all right, Z?" he called over, his posture relaxed but alert in a way only another operator would recognize. The shorter fake cop glanced nervously at his partner. "This doesn't concern you, sir. Please go back inside." Jake sauntered over, limping slightly from his own war souvenir. "You know, it's funny. I spent 20 years working with local law enforcement after my military career, and I've never seen badges quite like yours." He was now standing beside me. "Mind if I take a closer look?" The two men backed up a step. "We're here on official business," the taller one insisted, his hand still hovering near what I now suspected might not be a real firearm. "Official business usually comes with official identification," Jake said pleasantly. "And impersonating a police officer is a federal offense carrying up to 5 years in prison." I noticed Carol Norwood was no longer watching with satisfaction. She was hurriedly walking back toward her house. "1 minute," I said clearly. "You have 1 minute to show us legitimate law enforcement identification, or we're calling the actual police." The shorter man looked at his partner, uncertainty written across his face. "Carol said this would be simple," he muttered, not realizing how clearly his voice carried in the quiet neighborhood. That was all the confirmation I needed. I hit the record button on my phone's camera. "So Mrs. Norwood hired you to impersonate police officers?" I asked loudly and clearly. "We're not." The taller one started then stopped. "We were told this was legal. We work for Pacific Security Consultants. She said we were just delivering official HOA violations with some added authority." Jake had pulled out his own phone and was already dialing. "Hi, Chief Harrison. It's Jake Miller. Yeah, good to talk to you too. Listen, I've got two gentlemen here at my neighbor Zach's house claiming to be police officers but refusing to show identification. They just admitted they were hired by our HOA president." He paused. "Yeah, I thought you'd want to know about that. We're at 1423 Oakwood Drive." The two men looked at each other, then back at their car, clearly calculating whether they should run for it. "I wouldn't," I said calmly. "Impersonating an officer is bad. Fleeing the scene would make it worse." The shorter one sighed heavily. "Look, man, we didn't know. We're just security guards. Carol told us this was all approved by the town, that we were acting as official representatives of the HOA with legal enforcement powers." "And the weapons?" Jake asked. "Airsoft," the taller one admitted. "We were told not to take them out, just to let them be seen." Across the street, Carol had emerged from her house and was hurriedly getting into her Mercedes. "Jake!" I nodded toward her. "On it," he said, jogging across the street as smoothly as his injured leg would allow. I kept my phone recording as the fake officers continued explaining. Apparently, Carol had been hiring them for months to intimidate various homeowners into paying fines for violations, some real, most imagined. They'd show up, act official, and most people would just pay rather than risk trouble with the authorities. What I didn't know then was that this was just the tip of a very large, very corrupt iceberg. Within 15 minutes, the Real police arrived. Chief Harrison himself came, having known Jake for years. The two security guards were handcuffed and placed in separate police cars, while Jake had successfully prevented Carol from leaving. "Mr. Owens," Chief Harrison said, approaching me after taking preliminary statements, "I need to ask you some questions about your interactions with Mrs. Norwood and the HOA." "Of course," I replied. "But first, off the record." He lowered his voice. "Thank you. We've received some complaints about similar incidents in the past few months, but never had enough evidence to pursue them." As Carol was escorted to a police car, she locked eyes with me. "This isn't over, Zachary," she called out. "I have friends in this town you couldn't imagine." I had no idea how right she was. The story might have ended there, a greedy HOA president caught in a petty intimidation scheme. But 3 days later, I received a plain envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. "You opened Pandora's box. Be careful, but don't stop. Others have tried. A friend." I stared at the USB drive for a long time before deciding what to do. Military training teaches you to be cautious about unknown devices, but curiosity was getting the better of me. I called Jake. "Bring it over," he said immediately. "I've got an air-gapped laptop we can use." 20 minutes later, we were looking at spreadsheets, email screenshots, and bank statements, hundreds of documents showing a pattern of corruption that went far beyond fake police officers and petty HOA fines. "Holy hell," Jake muttered as we scrolled through. "This isn't just Carol. This is half the town council." The documents detailed a complex scheme. For years, Carol had been working with several town officials to manipulate property values and development approvals. They'd used the HOA to harass targeted homeowners into selling below market value, then flipped the properties to pre-selected developers at massive profits. The money was being funneled through shell companies, with kickbacks to everyone involved. But most disturbing were the emails discussing problem residents who needed to be handled. My name was on that list, along with 3 others who had openly questioned HOA decisions at recent meetings. "We need to take this to Chief Harrison," I said. Jake nodded. "But carefully. Look at these names: the deputy mayor, the zoning commissioner, even Judge Allen is mentioned. We don't know who else might be involved." We copied the files and secured the original USB drive in Jake's gun safe. Then we carefully selected the most damning evidence, enough to show the scope of the conspiracy without revealing everything we knew, and called Chief Harrison. "Can you meet us somewhere private?" Jake asked him. "Not the station. It's sensitive." 2 hours later, we sat in a booth at a diner 2 towns over, watching the police chief's face darken as he reviewed the documents. "I've had suspicions for years," he said finally. "Things that didn't add up. Investigations that got shut down from above. But nothing this concrete." He looked up at us. "Do you have any idea who sent this to you?" I shook my head. "The note just said a friend." "Well, this friend has given us enough to start, but we'll need more for court." He closed his laptop. "This has to be handled delicately. If they get wind of an investigation, evidence will disappear, and witnesses might too. What do you need from us?" Jake asked. "Lie low. Act normal. Let them think the fake cop incident was isolated. I'm going to contact the state police and the FBI. This crosses too many jurisdictional lines for me to handle alone, and I don't know who in my department I can fully trust." As we left the diner, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. A dark SUV with tinted windows was parked across the street, its engine running. "Don't look," Jake murmured. "But I think we've got company." "I saw it," I replied quietly. "Let's split up. If they follow one of us, the other can circle back." We casually parted ways in the parking lot. I took my time getting to my truck, even stopping to tie my shoe. When I pulled out, the SUV remained stationary. It wasn't until Jake left 5 minutes later that it pulled out to follow him. I immediately called him. "They're on you." "I see them," he replied calmly. "Time to find out who our friends are." Jake had always been the better tactical driver among us. I knew he could handle himself, but I followed at a distance anyway, ready to assist if needed. He led the SUV on a winding route through back roads and shopping centers before suddenly pulling into the fire station where he volunteered on weekends. The SUV hesitated, then drove past as Jake walked casually inside. I managed to get close enough to see the license plate before dropping back to avoid detection. When Jake emerged 20 minutes later, the SUV was gone. We met back at his house. "Fire chief let me check the plate through their system," Jake said, handing me a piece of paper. "Vehicle is registered to Pacific Consulting Group." "Pacific Security Consultants," I remembered. "The same company that provided the fake cops." "But that's not all," Jake continued. "I called a buddy who works for the Secretary of State's office. Pacific Security Consultants is owned by a holding company called Norwood Enterprises." "Carroll." "Exactly. And guess who sits on the board of Norwood Enterprises?" "Deputy Mayor Richards and Zoning Commissioner Peterson." The pieces were falling into place. "So they're still watching us, even with Carroll in custody." "She made bail this morning," Jake informed me. I checked. That night, I could barely sleep. Every passing car, every distant sound had me on edge. Around 2 a.m., I heard a distinct click from my back door. Years of training kicked in instantly. I silently moved to the hallway, retrieved my gun from its secure lockbox, and took up a position with clear sight lines to both the front and back entrances. The back door swung open slowly. A shadowy figure slipped inside, moving with the deliberate care of someone trying to remain undetected. When they passed the threshold of my living room, I hit the lights. "Hands where I can see them," I commanded, my voice steady. The intruder froze, then slowly raised their hands. It was a woman I'd never seen before, dressed in black, with short brown hair and calculating eyes. "Mr. Owens," she said, her voice surprisingly calm for someone staring down the barrel of a gun. "I'm not here to hurt you. Breaking into my house at 2 a.m. suggests otherwise," I replied. "Who are you?" "My name is Diana. I'm the one who sent you the USB drive." I kept my weapon trained on her. "Prove it. The note said you opened Pandora's box. I warned you to be careful but not to stop." I didn't lower my gun. "That doesn't tell me why I should trust you or why you broke into my house instead of calling like a normal person." She gave a tight smile. "Because my phone, like everything else in my life, is compromised. I worked for Carol Norwood for 3 years as her executive assistant. I've been collecting evidence against her and her associates, but they discovered me 2 days ago. I barely got out with my life. So you thought breaking into a veteran's home was a good idea? I thought warning the only person who successfully stood up to them was my only option. She slowly reached toward her pocket. May I? I nodded cautiously. She pulled out a phone and showed me a news article dated for tomorrow morning. The headline read, Local executive assistant found dead in apparent suicide. They're already setting up my suicide, she said quietly. I have nowhere else to go. I finally lowered my weapon slightly. Tell me everything. Start with how deep this goes. Diana sat at my kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. It's not just property manipulation, she explained. That's just their most profitable venture. They've got their hands in everything: construction contracts, municipal service providers, even the local court system. And Carol is at the center? She nodded. Carol and her husband, Thomas. He stays in the background, but he's the financial genius. They moved here 8 years ago with nothing. Now they control half the town. What about the town council? The police? Council is split. Some are in their pocket, some are clueless, a few suspect something but are too afraid to speak up. She took a sip of coffee. As for the police, most of the rank and file are clean. Chief Harrison isn't involved, which is why they've been trying to force him into early retirement. But there are 2 detectives and the administrative captain who report directly to the Norwoods. I leaned back, processing this information. So what's your plan? I don't have one beyond staying alive and getting my evidence to the right people. She looked at me intently. You've already taken the first steps. You've got Chief Harrison's attention. And you're harder to intimidate or eliminate than I am. Because of my military background? Partly. But also because you're visible now. The community knows about the fake police incident. If something happens to you, people will ask questions. I checked my watch, nearly 3 a.m. We need to move you somewhere safe, then contact Chief Harrison again. But not from here. My house might be watched or even bugged. Diana looked alarmed. If they know I came here, they'll assume I'm now a major threat rather than just a nuisance. I finished. All the more reason to move quickly. I called Jake, keeping the conversation vague. Within 20 minutes he arrived in an old delivery van I'd never seen before. Borrowed it from the fire station, he explained. We use it for equipment transport. He looked at Diana. This our whistleblower? I nodded. She needs protection while we figure out next steps. I've got just the place, Jake said. But we need to be smart about this. They've already shown they're watching us. Using every counter-surveillance technique we'd learned in the military, we made our way to an isolated cabin owned by Jake's uncle in the mountains about 40 miles outside town. The property had no direct connection to either of us on paper. As dawn broke, we sat around a map of the town, with Diana pointing out key locations and individuals in the Norwoods network. The crucial evidence is here, she said, pointing to a building downtown. Thomas Norwood has a private office on the top floor of the Peterson building. There's a safe behind the bookcase, classic, I know. But it contains hard copies of all their arrangements, including signed documents from everyone involved. It's their insurance policy against anyone talking. And you know this how? Jake asked. I've seen Thomas open it. I was supposed to be bringing him coffee, but he didn't hear me come in. The combination is their anniversary, October 22nd, 98. I exchanged glances with Jake. Getting into that office wouldn't be easy, but between the two of us, we had the skills. There's something else you should know, Diana added hesitantly. They're accelerating their timeline for something big. After you exposed the fake police officers, they had an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but I overheard enough to know they're planning to move forward with Project Renewal immediately. What's Project Renewal? I asked. I don't know the details, but it involves the east side of town, the older neighborhoods where most of the working-class families live. From what I've gathered, they're planning to force those homeowners out, demolish everything, and build luxury condos and an upscale shopping center. Jake frowned. That's half the town. Thousands of people would be displaced. And they'd make millions, Diana confirmed. The paperwork is already being processed to rezone the entire area. When? I asked. The final vote is at tomorrow night's town council meeting. If it passes, they start serving eviction notices the next day. We spent the next several hours formulating a plan. Jake would contact Chief Harrison using a secure method to arrange a meeting. Meanwhile, Diana would compile everything she knew into a formal statement. I would reconnoiter Thomas Norwood's office building to find entry points and security vulnerabilities. What about the council meeting tomorrow? Diana asked. Even if we get the evidence, it might be too late to stop the vote. Then we make sure the vote doesn't happen, I said firmly. The next morning, I drove back into town alone, taking a circuitous route to ensure I wasn't followed. Downtown was bustling with its usual weekday activity as I parked a block away from the Peterson building and observed from a cafe across the street. Security seemed relatively standard: a check-in desk in the lobby, keycard access for the elevators, and security cameras at main entry points. Nothing a former Delta operator couldn't handle, especially with inside information. As I was making mental notes, a familiar Mercedes pulled up in front of the building. Carol Norwood stepped out, looking immaculate as always in a blue business suit. She strode purposefully into the building, not sparing a glance for anything around her. 20 minutes later, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Meeting set. Same diner. 1 p.m. Come alone. J. I arrived at the diner early, scanning for surveillance or potential threats before entering. Chief Harrison was already there, seated in a back booth away from windows. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes. Thank you for coming, I said, sliding into the seat across from him. He nodded grimly. Your friend Jake mentioned you have more information. And a witness? We do. An insider who's been gathering evidence for months. She's in a secure location now, but she's willing to testify about everything. Good, because we're going to need it. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. I contacted the FBI yesterday. They're interested but cautious. Apparently, there have been complaints about this town before, but investigations always stall due to lack of evidence or witnesses who suddenly change their stories. What about the documents I showed you? Compelling, but not enough for a warrant. We need the originals, not copies, and we need testimony linking specific individuals to specific actions. He paused as a waitress brought coffee. When she left, he continued, There's something else. I've been placed on administrative leave this morning. What? Why? Official reason is pending investigation of procedural violations. Unofficial reason is I've been asking too many questions about the Norwood case. My deputy is now acting chief. He's one of theirs. This complicated matters. Without Harrison's authority, our plan to gather evidence became much riskier. What about the town council meeting tonight? I asked. It's still on. From what I hear, they've got the votes lined up to push through this rezoning proposal. Once that happens, there's no going back. They'll have legal authority to begin forcing people out. I thought for a moment. We need to delay that vote. Buy time until we can get the evidence from Norwood's office. And how do you propose to do that? Harrison asked. By creating a very public spectacle. Something they can't ignore or easily dismiss. I outlined my idea, watching Harrison's expression shift from skepticism to reluctant approval. It's risky, he said finally. But it might work. Just be careful. These people have shown they're willing to go to extreme lengths to protect their interests. I'm counting on it, I replied. That's how we'll expose them. As evening fell, the town hall began filling with residents for the council meeting. News of the rezoning proposal had spread, and many of the potentially affected homeowners had come to voice their concerns. The atmosphere was tense, with uniformed security guards positioned at each entrance, more than usual for a council meeting. I sat near the back, watching as the 7 town council members filed in and took their places at the elevated table. Mayor Thompson called the meeting to order with a perfunctory bang of his gavel. Before we begin tonight's agenda, I want to remind everyone that each public comment is limited to 3 minutes, and all comments must be directly relevant to agenda items," he announced, his tone making it clear he expected trouble. The council ran through several minor items before reaching the main event. Proposal 37B, Rezoning of East Lakeside District for Mixed-Use Development. Commissioner Peterson stood to present the proposal, his slideshow depicting gleaming condominiums and upscale shops replacing what he characterized as aging substandard housing. "This revitalization project represents a $300 million investment in our community," he declared proudly. "Property values throughout town will increase, tax revenues will grow, and new businesses will create hundreds of jobs." What he conveniently omitted was any mention of what would happen to the current residents, many of whom had lived there for generations. When the public comment period opened, dozens of hands shot up. The first few speakers were clearly plants, local business owners who enthusiastically supported the proposal, though none of them actually lived in the affected area. Then came the angry homeowners, each trying to cram their outrage and fear into 3 minutes. "My family has owned our house for 60 years," an elderly woman said, her voice wavering. "Where are we supposed to go if you force us out? The compensation package is more than fair," Peterson responded dismissively. Next speaker. A middle-aged man stepped up. "These fair offers are half what our properties are worth. How are we supposed to buy elsewhere in town with that? Market values have been independently verified." Mayor Thompson cut in. "Please keep comments constructive." It went on like this for nearly an hour, with the council barely disguising their impatience. Finally, it was my turn to speak. "My name is Zachary Owens," I began calmly. "I'm a homeowner in the Oakwood neighborhood, not directly affected by this proposal. But I'd like to ask a question about the financial disclosures related to this project." Mayor Thompson frowned. "What specific question do you have about the publicly available information, Mr. Owens?" "I'm curious about Pacific Consulting Group and its subsidiary, Norwood Enterprises, which appear to be the primary beneficiaries of this rezoning." I pulled out a folder and made a show of consulting it. "Specifically, I'm wondering why several members of this council failed to disclose their financial interests in these companies." A murmur ran through the crowd. Commissioner Peterson's face flushed red. "That's a baseless accusation," the mayor snapped. "If you have no relevant question about the proposal itself, please step away from the microphone. I also wonder," I continued as if he hadn't spoken, "why the independent property assessors who determined these fair market values are on the payroll of the same companies. Or why residents who have publicly opposed this plan have received visits from fake police officers hired by the HOA president, who is coincidentally married to the owner of Norwood Enterprises." "That's enough." Mayor Thompson banged his gavel repeatedly. "Security, please escort Mr. Owens out if he continues with these slanderous claims." 2 security guards started moving toward me. This was exactly what I had expected. "Before I'm removed," I said clearly into the microphone, "I'd like to inform everyone that copies of documentation supporting these slanderous claims have been provided to the FBI, the state police, and select media outlets." This wasn't entirely true yet, but it would be soon. "I suggest this council table this vote pending the outcome of those investigations." The room erupted in chaos. Residents began shouting questions and demands. The security guards reached me, each taking one of my arms. "Sir, you need to come with us," one said firmly. "Of course," I agreed pleasantly. "I've said what I came to say." As they escorted me out, I noticed Carol Norwood in the back of the room, her face a mask of fury as she spoke urgently into her phone. Outside Town Hall, the guards released me with a warning not to return. I walked calmly to my truck, knowing I had successfully created the distraction we needed. Inside, the meeting had descended into disorder, with residents demanding answers to my allegations. Meanwhile, across town, Jake was putting the second phase of our plan into action. The Peterson building's after-hours security was minimal, just a single guard at the front desk and the electronic keycard system. Jake, using credentials borrowed from Diana, had no trouble gaining access to the service elevator, which took him to the maintenance level just below the top floor. From there, reaching Thomas Norwood's office required bypassing just one more keycard reader, child's play for someone with Jake's training. Inside the luxurious corner office, he quickly located the bookcase Diana had described and swung it open to reveal the wall safe. The combination, October 22, 98, worked just as she'd said. Inside were folders of documents, a portable hard drive, and several USB drives. Jake photographed everything in place before removing it all and replacing it with identical-looking folders containing blank paper. By the time anyone discovered the switch, it would be too late. Back at the cabin, Diana was on a secure call with an FBI agent, walking through her statement and explaining the evidence she'd gathered. The agent had been skeptical at first but became increasingly interested as Diana provided specific names, dates, and transactions. "We'll need you to come in to sign a formal statement," the agent told her. "But based on what you've provided already, combined with complaints we've received from other sources, we have enough to open a full investigation." "What about protection?" Diana asked. "These people have already tried to silence me once." "We can arrange for protective custody once you're formally in the system," the agent assured her. "In the meantime, stay where you are. We'll contact you with instructions within 24 hours. As Diana ended the call, I arrived back at the cabin. "How did it go?" she asked anxiously. "Exactly as planned," I replied. "Complete chaos. They had to adjourn the meeting without voting on the rezoning proposal. It's been tabled for at least 2 weeks, pending clarification of certain allegations. And Jake? Should be here soon. He texted that he got everything." Sure enough, 20 minutes later, Jake walked in carrying a nondescript backpack. "Jackpot," he announced, emptying the contents onto the table. "Every dirty deal they've made for the past 5 years, with signatures, dates, and amounts." We spent the next few hours organizing and documenting everything, creating multiple copies to be distributed to law enforcement agencies at different levels, as well as to trusted journalists. By morning, we had assembled an airtight case against the Norwoods and their co-conspirators. "What now?" Diana asked as we finished. "Now we go public," I said. "All at once, from multiple angles. Too big to cover up, too well documented to dismiss." Jake nodded. "I'll deliver copies to the state police and FBI field office personally. And I'll handle the media," I added. "I have a contact at the regional news station who's been looking for a breakthrough story." Diana looked worried. "What about me?" "Once this breaks, they'll know I was involved. By then, you'll be safely in FBI protective custody," I assured her. "Jake and I will escort you to their field office this afternoon." The next 48 hours were a whirlwind. The story broke first on local news, then quickly spread to national outlets. FBI agents and state police descended on the town, executing search warrants at multiple locations simultaneously, including Carol and Thomas Norwood's home, their offices, and the homes of 3 town council members. Carol Norwood was arrested while attempting to board a private plane at a small regional airport. Thomas was taken into custody at his office, along with Commissioner Peterson and Deputy Mayor Richards. By the end of the week, 17 people had been charged in the conspiracy, including the fake police officers, who quickly turned state's evidence in exchange for reduced sentences. Chief Harrison was reinstated with a public apology from the town manager. The rezoning proposal was permanently shelved, and a special election was called to replace the corrupt council members. As for me, I returned to my quiet life in the Oakwood neighborhood, though quiet now had a different meaning. Neighbors who had never spoken to me before stopped by to express their gratitude. The local paper ran a profile calling me a hometown hero. I tried to deflect as much of the attention as possible toward Diana, whose courage in coming forward had made everything possible, but she was still in protective custody, preparing to testify in the upcoming trials. 1 month after the arrests, I was tending to my garden when a familiar figure limped up my driveway. "Special delivery," Jake called out, holding up an envelope. "What's this?" I asked, taking it from him. "Open it and see," Inside was a letter from the town council, the new town council, officially dissolving the homeowners association for our neighborhood, citing irreparable breach of trust and evidence of systematic abuse of authority. They can't do that fast enough. I laughed. Though I will miss Carol's monthly emails about my grass being half an inch too tall. Jake grinned. Oh, I brought something else too. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bronze plaque. It read, in recognition of Zachary Owens, who reminded us that standing up for what's right is always worth the fight. The town council had it made, he explained. They're installing it in the town hall lobby next week. I shook my head, embarrassed but touched. I just did what needed to be done. That's what makes it special, Z. Most people see what needs doing but wait for someone else to do it. He clapped me on the shoulder. Speaking of which, Diana called. She's being moved to a more permanent location next week, but she wanted me to tell you thank you. Again. Later that evening, as I sat on my porch watching the sunset, I reflected on how quickly life can change. One moment you're watering plants, the next you're facing down fake cops and corrupt officials. But sometimes that's what it takes, one person refusing to be intimidated, standing firm when others would back down. The HOA was gone. Carol Norwood and her co-conspirators were awaiting trial. My neighbors could keep their homes. All because I'd asked to see some identification. As a Delta Force veteran, I'd faced more dangerous situations in far-flung corners of the world. But this battle, fought right here on my own street, had reminded me of something important. The training to spot threats and the courage to confront them weren't just skills for the battlefield. Sometimes, they were exactly what an ordinary neighborhood needed to set things right. And it had all happened in just 60 seconds, the moment I decided to stand my ground instead of backing down.